Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It's me, Joey P, Joe P. Zapia. That is Kyle Yates. And today our guest from CBS Fantasy is none other than Frank Stampfl. And of course, as always, it's you. And it's week 5 in the NFL, which means it's time to make some moves. It's time to hit that waiver wire and hit it hard. Find the names that can help us in these terrible time of injuries in the NFL, and there seems like another week, always another injury. But Frank Stampfl, I know, is a little injured because he had a very, very important wedding to go to this weekend. He's still recuperating from it. Frank, I'm just happy you made it here today to the show, my friend. How are you?
Joe, I'm happy I made it here myself, too, because I could barely get out of bed. It is rough right now. Brother-in-law, huge wedding. If anyone out there has ever been to a Polish wedding, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My body hurts more today than it did yesterday, so that's where I'm at. My calves can barely move. I'm on fire. Everything is great. Let's go. Week 5. I'm excited.
There you go. Yates, you must be on fire, too, after watching Trey Lance yesterday a little bit, and it looks like you're going to get him at least for the next couple weeks, and I have a bad feeling we're going to somehow be talking a lot about Trey Lance today on the Waiver Wire program. Wouldn't you agree?
We might mention him. He might come up.
Might come up. Maybe. Possibly. We'll see. We'll see how it all goes. But obviously, we're going to get to all the running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, the streaming Ds, the quarterbacks, all of that good stuff. But before we do, I want to remind everybody, make sure you head over to youtube.com/fantasypros so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Subscribe and click that notifications button as well because we have so much great content. It's not just the podcast. We've got individual live streams all throughout the week, including on Sundays, all the starts and sits, helping you guys out there. Plus, we've also got really cool individual videos that are popping up there on a daily basis. So the only way you know what's going on is if you're one of the cool kids and you subscribe over to Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And don't forget that little bell as well. It's very nice when you click that little bell. Our producer, Chris, gets very excited. He gets very happy about that. It makes his whole day. He needs it. He needs a little pick-me-up. He's got a big game coming up for the Red Sox, so he needs all the help he can get. Also, I want to remind everybody, too, about My Playbook cheat sheets. Now, premium subscribers can get the most out of My Playbook by having access to all of our great tools, and that includes the Waiver Assistant, the Trade Analyzer, the Start Sit Assistant, and Autopilot, of course. But if you want to check out My Playbook for free before you subscribe to see what it's all about, try using My Playbook cheat sheets at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. All you have to do is set up your league and get instant waiver wire and lineup advice by combining your favorite experts' weekly, rest of season, dynasty rankings, whatever, in one customizable cheat sheet. And you can find those cheat sheets only in one place. That's fantasypros.com/myplaybook. And again, it's free. So go in there and check out My Playbook if you haven't already. Now let's get to the names. And of course, we have to start at the running back position. So, Yates, I'll start with you and give Frank a little bit more time to recuperate from the wedding. Just a little bit more, maybe some more fluids in him. We'll see how it goes. But, Yates, let's start here with who your number one running back is off the waiver wire this week and how much of your fab you're willing to spend.
Of course. So right now we don't have clarity yet on David Montgomery's injury. We don't know exactly how long he's going to miss. It sounds like he escaped a major injury, which is good news, not only for fantasy managers and the Chicago Bears, but David Montgomery himself, that he doesn't have to go through a grueling rehab process. But it does sound like he's at least going to miss this next week, potentially the next couple here. And I'm sure that, of course, like I always say, as soon as we finish recording this episode, it will break that David Montgomery is, we'll get clarity on it. But for right now, Damien Williams is sitting at the number one spot for me because right now, especially for fantasy managers that have rostered guys like Myles Gaskin, and then also David Montgomery, like you're going to need a replacement option right now. And Damien Williams, say what you will and say what you want about the Chicago Bears offense, he's a starting running back. He will get 12 minimum touches, if not 15. So I think Damien Williams has to be at the top of the list here this upcoming week because of his workload, and then potentially the fact that he'll start a couple weeks after that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it was a thigh bruise also that Williams came away with in that game?
Yes, we got that news too, that it was like, all right, Damien Williams also dealing with an injury, but it sounds like it's just a thigh bruise. He will be good to go for this upcoming week. So Damien Williams, as a baseline for me, I'm willing to spend 15% of my fab. I'm not going super crazy because I don't think that he is going to be, he's not like he's starting the rest of the year. But when we desperately need starting running backs right now for our fantasy lineups, Damien Williams shoots up the rankings.
Now, Frank, we obviously believe that Montgomery will not play this week. A lot of early news has been perhaps a hyperextension of the knee, but I think we're all kind of looking at is at least a week without David Montgomery, if not more. So what does that do to Damien Williams? And assuming he is the number one on your board anyway, in terms of how much fab you want to spend on him, because it could be kind of a limited amount of time where he could even be useful to you. But maybe I'm being presumptuous. Maybe he's not your one. Frank, who is your one, and how much do you want to spend on him?
Yeah, my number one is also Damien Williams. I'm right there with the Yates. I think 15 to 18% is the range that I was looking at in terms of fab. And I think if you have David Montgomery on your team and you didn't have Damien Williams, or you have a Myles Gaskin and you really do need a running back, I can see going as high as 20 to 25% on the high end if you're really, really desperate for a running back. But it sounds like this is going to be at least a multi-week absence right now. And again, we're assuming that with David Montgomery. But to get a running back who is a good pass catcher, who can handle a workload, who obviously has a history here with Matt Nagy as well, I'm looking at something like 15 to 18%. And he was good. He was good in this game in week 4 here too. 33% of the snaps, 55 rushing yards, and a touchdown, 6.9 yards per carry. We know that he's a capable pass catcher as well. So I'm right there with you. I think he's number one this week.
And the matchup coming up this week is against Las Vegas. Make it 3 for 3 on the sweep. I'm somewhere in that 15% range too. Obviously, you have Montgomery. It's a little bit more pressing. You can probably bump it up a little bit more towards that 18 range because desperation, right? We all need running backs. We all got to figure it out. And I got to tell you, it was a little depressing this week, boys, going through the rest of season running back rankings. I was just kind of looking around going, boy, oh boy, this is getting more and more difficult to try to figure out. But if that's the obvious one, let's go and see who number 2 is. Frank, we'll circle back the other way this time around. Who is your second running back off the waiver wire this week, and how much do you want to spend on them?
Yeah, I don't think there's as much of a clear-cut number 2 on this list compared to number 1, at least, for Damien Williams. So for me, I'd be looking at Samaje Perine. Joe Mixon diagnosed with a low-grade ankle sprain, and that will leave him week to week. And we know that he's dealt with foot injuries in the past, a bunch of injuries in the past for Joe Mixon. So I think we know at this point, like, Samaje Perine is not a very talented football player, but this is really just opportunity. And the Cincinnati Bengals, where they're at right now, it's clear that they really do not want to put a lot on Joe Burrow's plate, at least early on in the season, coming off that devastating knee injury. Maybe that changes now that they don't have Joe Mixon and that reliable running back to lean on, but I could see something like 6 to 8% of your fab on Samaje Perine, especially if you have Joe Mixon on your team. Again, I don't think he's very good. I think maybe in a deeper league, you look at Chris Evans, just a name to throw out there, dollar bid, whatever it might be. But yeah, Samaje Perine number 2 on this list for me.
That was going to be my next question: is would you throw a dollar as a backup, a secondary bid if you don't get Perine, maybe just to get a piece of the backfield if indeed Chris Evans gets more attention? But that's a yes for you.
Yep, that's a yes for me. Yeah, dollar bid, why not? I do think that Chris Evans, you look at his player profiler page, 96th percentile or better in agility and burst scores, a 6th-round rookie running back. So, yeah, I would be looking at him for $1.
Also, high grading scores is Kyle Yates. A lot of people don't know that. If you go look at his draft grades, they were very good, especially in the bench press. He was very strong. Yeah,
super athletic.
Yeah, especially you wouldn't think of it when you see him. You say, well, he's kind of a wiry, tall guy, but no, man, he's putting up that 225 like it's nothing, baby, like it's nothing. Who's your number 2, Yates, on the waiver wire running back this week? Is it Perine or is it somebody else?
Yeah, we're in lockstep so far. It's Samaje Perine at the number 2 spot, and I'm actually going to be a little bit more aggressive to get Perine on my roster, and this is due to his upcoming schedule and the fact that we need running backs. Like, we just desperately need players that are going to be given volume, and so Samaje Perine, I'm willing to go 12 to 15% on Samaje Perine here because I think that he is going to get a significant workload here. And I do think that we could also talk about Chris Evans like he did. I think we can mention him here. He's sitting at number 4 in my running back spot waiver wire rankings this week because I think that he's going to take that pass catch and complement role here where Samaje Perine will be the guy that is the grounder. So I think with Samaje Perine, Green Bay Packers in week 1, you can run on them. Detroit Lions the next week. I think that these are 2 matchups where we could be talking about Perine as a top 24 option. And if that is the case, when we desperately need those top 24 options at the running back position, I think he's worth taking a look at.
All right, for me, number 2, I'm going to just talk about somebody else, and it's my favorite guy that I talk about every single week. He has made the show, and it's Kenneth Gainwell. He's still out there, still rostered in just 27% of leagues, and yesterday he caught 6 balls for 58 yards and a touchdown, and that's a nice little chunk of change there, I would say, for Kenneth Gainwell, and continues to show that the NFL is not too big of a stage for him. This week he's got Carolina coming up. After that, a little trickier with Tampa, obviously. But, you can't really run the ball against Tampa, but you can kind of throw it onto the outside a little bit against them and take advantage of that ferocious pass rush that they can offer sometimes. So I just like Gainwell going forward as a guy to stash. And look, it's been a little erratic. He was very good the first week, and then the next 2 weeks kind of middling, and then last week, obviously, against Kansas City, very good matchup. Sure, some garbage time in there, but you know what? Points are points. So give me Gainwell. Perine would be my 3. If I'm going to spend some money on Gainwell, though, it's not a lot at this point. You should be able to pick him up for like $5 or something like that. So somewhere around 5% of the budget makes sense. But Perine, the guys make a great observation there for him, because going forward, you definitely have the opportunity for perhaps this week, maybe 2 weeks there with Mixon. We don't know what's going on. Again, we get more information. That's what we're going to have to go off of. But there's opportunity. And right now, goodness knows, there's a lot of question marks when it comes to that. Is there anybody else, Yates, you want to make a case for? Because this is kind of where my running back waiver wire stops this week.
It really is. I mean, I've got, my top 5 here is Damien Williams, Samaje Perine, Kenneth Gainwell at 3. And for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, Joe, like, he is going to be a little bit inconsistent. He's going to be one of these game script dependent guys. He was playing, as the pass catching complement while they were playing from behind for the majority of that game. So I think that when we can identify those matchups, I think those are the ones where we can plug in Kenneth Gainwell as, a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 in full PPR formats. But I don't think that he's suddenly now this guy that we need to go chase what happened here this past week. And then I've got Chris Evans at 4. He's worth adding to the bottom of your roster if you're in a deeper league. I'm not ready to play him just yet, but it's worth monitoring. And then I've got Malcolm Brown at 5. And I quite frankly do not want to play Malcolm Brown or even pick him up because he's going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run defense here this next week. So after that, it's guys like Darrel Williams. He's worth rostering for the upside, but I'm not buying into him scoring every single week. And then Ty Montgomery. I'm not looking at Ty Montgomery. That's pretty much it.
Dolphins running backs do not have a good situation next week coming up. Especially Gaskin was a non-entity. People would be thinking, well, did somebody else get the carries? Something else work? No, nothing else worked for the Dolphins. What's working for you here, Frank? Besides the 2 guys you already mentioned, is there other people out here at running back that you think are worthy of rostering? And if so, what are you looking for to add them?
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page with the top 3 here. I have Kenneth Gainwell as well. And look, he's the pass-catching running back in this offense, and they're manufacturing touches for him. I still do believe that Miles Sanders is the better all-around talent, but Gainwell has found himself on the field at the right time, right? Like, there'll be like these long runs that Miles Sanders breaks off, and they take him off the field to give him a breather, and then Kenneth Gainwell gets in there and he scores a touchdown, or he's using the red zone for whatever reason. So I do think 5 to 7% of your budget on Kenneth Gainwell, especially in full PPR, makes a ton of sense. For me, number 4, I have Darrel Williams on this list, and he's mostly a handcuff. I think he has some standalone value if you're just chasing a touchdown as a flex on bye weeks. Obviously not excited to start Darrel Williams on any given week, but he has scored a touchdown in each of the past 2 weeks, I believe, and but he's not played more than 36% of the snaps in any game this year. So if anything were to happen to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think that the Chiefs are probably just going to pass the ball more if that were to happen.
Is that possible, Frank? Can they?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, but I guess we would find out if something happened there. But for Darrel Williams, I think it would be a valuable spot just because of the offense that he plays on with the Chiefs. And then number 5 for me is Chris Evans, who we already mentioned.
All right, let's move on to wide receiver then, and let's talk about the guys. Frank, we'll start with you on this one. Who is the wide receiver you would like to pluck off the waiver wire first and put on your roster, and how much you want to spend on them?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty popular option this week, and it's Darnell Mooney, who just had a great game in week 4, 5 catches for 125 yards and 7 targets. He saw 42% of Justin Fields' target share in that game. And obviously, I think that the talent just kind of meshes well here between what Justin Fields can do well and obviously what Darnell Mooney can do well. And it's obviously get down the field. And we know he had a ton of air yards last year, too. And we're kind of waiting for that to come to fruition. And maybe Justin Fields is the quarterback that he can do that with. So I don't know, like, long-term what the quarterback situation is going to look like here in Chicago, because they're already talking about, well, when Andy Dalton is good to go, it's going to be his job again. So obviously we don't like to hear stuff like that. But I could see 10 to 12% of your fab budget on Darnell Mooney. Obviously, Allen Robinson is still there. I still think Allen Robinson is the best pass catcher on this team, but it really hasn't happened yet. So I do think as long as Justin Fields is in there, Darnell Mooney is a very enticing option.
Some better play calling yesterday, obviously, out of the Bears. Couldn't get much worse, but then again, better is better. We can all put that aside. And look, he did finish as wide receiver 12 overall on Sunday. This is before Monday Night Football, but in the half PPR format, look, he had 7 targets, 5 catches for 125. And look, it's also looked good doing it, and finally we're seeing somebody who's challenging and throwing the ball deep, and that's something where you can attack downfield a little bit when you have Justin Fields playing quarterback. I don't want to hear any more Andy Dalton noise. Darnell Mooney is my guy too at number 1 at wide receiver. Yates, is he also your number 1?
He is completely my number one option. And throughout the entire offseason, Joe, we talked about Darnell Mooney nonstop on mock draft episodes and just highlighting and saying it's probably not going to be super pretty through, the first couple of weeks here with Andy Dalton. But once Justin Fields takes over, what did I say? Routinely, I said that he has top 24 upside. And we saw that here with the play calling changing. We didn't see it with week 1 of Justin Fields, certainly, but we saw it here against the Lions. Frank mentioned, 42% of the target share, 100 air yards yesterday. Like, that is just beautiful for a player of Darnell Mooney's skill set, and that one-handed grab that he had was just beautiful. So Darnell Mooney moving forward, I don't know. I don't know if Matt Nagy is going to go back to Andy Dalton. I don't know why you would. I just put out a tweet right before we started recording that said, like, Matt Nagy is refusing to use Justin Fields is like someone being given a Lamborghini that is a manual transmission. However, they don't know how to use a manual transmission, so they leave the Lamborghini in the garage and drive their automatic Toyota Corolla. Like, that's kind of what this is like here for Matt Nagy with Justin Fields and then Andy Dalton. So I think with him going back to Andy Dalton, we still know that Mooney's going to be fine. He's still going to see a significant target share. We saw that even throughout the first part of the game in week 2 before Dalton went down. So we're going to see Mooney be fine, but he has the top 24 upside as long as Justin Fields is starting. And I think I'm betting on him being that option long term.
All right, let's go to your number 2 then, Yates. Who, if not Darnell Mooney, are you spending on at wide receiver in week 5?
I feel like we've said this throughout the entire season that once you get past like maybe the top 2 options at the wide receiver position, then all these guys just kind of go into the same bucket. And I'm really fine with which one that you want to spend up on. So for me, actually, Jamison Crowder is at number 2. And Jamison Crowder, for me, is not someone that I'm like, oh, yeah, let's go ahead, Jamison Crowder. This is going to be great. But it's just more so looking at the other options and saying, I think that he is going to be a safe option for your starting lineup moving forward. With Crowder coming back into the lineup, and even with Elijah Moore, he was out this past week. We don't know what his status is for week 5. But Keelan Cole played on the outside. You had Jamison Crowder assume his role in the slot. And I think that that's going to continue moving forward. And they get Atlanta this next week. So I think Jamison Crowder is one of those guys that you can pick up if you're in need at the wide receiver position for a flex spot, and you can drop him into your lineup in full PPR formats, and he's going to be fine. But he is someone that I'm talking like 8%, 7% in that range, not spending up to get Jamison Crowder on my roster.
I think the exact spend is what I had in mind, and Crowder was the exact guy on my list as too. It's also because he's playing the Falcons next week.
Right.
Did we not watch that game? Did we not watch the Falcons defense all year? And for the young quarterback too, having that reliable slot wide receiver, we saw it even in Darnold's early career. Do you remember when all he would do was throw to Jamison Crowder? Like, that was it. That was the only thing that Darnold was capable of doing in that game.
Pretty much all he had, though.
That is fair. That is a very fair point. But at the same time, look, it was a better performance for Wilson. Hopefully he can build upon that. That's for sure. Getting their first win at home, very exciting. I don't know if I'd be dumping Gatorade jugs on people after that win necessarily, but whatever, a win is a win.
You do you.
You do you, Jets. You do you. But also, Crowder at this point, especially in the full PPR, if he's going to get a high volume of targets, that's good enough right there for double-digit points potentially. He doesn't need to score a touchdown. He could be a flex play potentially against Atlanta anyway, and maybe even going forward, barring any health issues. But I'm with you. I don't want to overspend either on Crowder because the Jets' offense is still going to be limited overall, especially when they do play better defenses, when they cycle back around to their division, playing the Buffalo Bills, playing the Patriots defense, etc., etc. So, Frank, who is your number 2 wide receiver, and how much you can spend on them this week in Fab?
Yeah, so I hear you guys on Jamison Crowder. I've got the little Jets banner right above me here, so I know very well about Jamison Crowder and the years with Sam Darnold, and I think he's a viable wide receiver 3 in PPR or a bye week replacement. We got bye weeks that are coming up soon enough, but Braxton Berrios was seeing 22% of the target share, and now Crowder kind of just steps into that role as their slot wide receiver. I say all of that just to say that number 2 on my list is not Jamison Crowder. It's actually it's Curtis Samuel, who did return in week 4 here. He played 22 snaps. He ran 13 routes on Sunday, splitting his time basically evenly between playing in the slot and out wide. He actually had one snap where he lined up in the backfield and actually was targeted out of the backfield. And he does have a history with Ron Rivera back in their days with the Carolina Panthers. And Logan Thomas is dealing with an injury himself, and apparently he is week to week. So Taylor Heinicke is playing very well. I do think, obviously, Terry McLaurin is the number 1 pass catcher in this offense, and rightfully so. He is amazing and super fun to watch. But we've waited for Curtis Samuel to return here, and I think a similar price point as Jamison Crowder in terms of Fab, maybe 7 to 9%, 8 to 10%, somewhere in that range. But he is a playmaker. They're dealing with injuries injuries. Taylor Heinicke is playing well, so I will go with Curtis Samuel, but Jamison Crowder is number 3 on my list.
You know, Frank, going into this past weekend, Terry McLaurin and Taylor Heinicke were the lock plays in our DFS show. And watching that game and watching, in particular, Terry McLaurin's effort level just being so extraordinary at all times, even coming off for a play after, taking a pretty significant fall, basically flat, going for a football and then coming back and continuing to fight for the football in the end zone, making plays all over the place. He is so impressive, but they need to diversify a little bit. So a guy like Curtis Samuel getting healthy now, I think, helps them a lot potentially. This is going to be something to keep an eye going forward. I can't imagine we were expecting too much in this first game from Samuel, but going forward, I mean, he is just rostered in 48% of leagues, so he's out there in a lot of your more casual formats. So, Frank, what's the rest of the wide receiver grouping for you if you go through your top 5 here after you get Samuel and Darnell Mooney?
Yeah, so I've got Mooney up at number 1. I've got Curtis Samuel second. I'm with you guys on Jamison Crowder. He's inside my top 3 for wide receiver. And then I have Hunter Renfrow 4th, and I have A.J. Green 5th. Hunter Renfrow, we haven't seen play yet because Monday Night Football going up against the Chargers, but 17% target share on the season, at least 5 catches, at least 57 yards in each game. I don't think that he is very flashy, but I do think that he provides a pretty safe floor. And then A.J. Green has exactly 6 targets in each game this season. He has a touchdown or 112 receiving yards in 3 straight. And I just want exposure to the Cardinals' offense. It's actually interesting. They have a very wide target share right now. There's like 6 or 7 different pass catchers that are between a 10 and like 20% target share. So usually we don't like that for fantasy, but as good as this offense is playing right now, as great as Kyler Murray is playing, I just want cheap exposure to them, and I think A.J. Green is a good way to do that.
We're in lockstep here, Frank. I've got Renfrow at 4, Green at 5, and I think for a couple bucks you could probably pick them up, especially with the bye weeks looming as we were talking about. And there's some other names out here to get to. Let's see if maybe Yates has some different names in the rest of his top 5. Yates, who's your 3, 4, 5 in wide receiver rankings for Waiver Wire in Week 5?
If you're looking for different names, you're going to be disappointed because I am right there. I have actually never done a show with Frank, and we are very like-minded. So Hunter Renfrow is at 3 for me. And again, it could change based on what we see here on Monday Night Football. But with Derek Carr leading the league up to, coming into this week, leading the league in passing yards, I want pieces of this offense, which seems ridiculous to say, but I want pieces of this offense. And Hunter Renfrow brings an extremely safe floor. So it's kind of the same thing with Jamison Crowder. It's like, I know what I'm going to get. I know that I'm going to get those 5 to 7 targets. He's probably going to catch upwards of 80% of them. And he might be able to find the end zone, right? If he puts on one of those ridiculous, like, triple moves or whatever that he's been running. He's an excellent route runner. So I think with Hunter Renfrow, he's one of those guys that you can pick up, you can be safe, you feel safe with. AJ Green is at 5 for me, and I, for a lot of the same reasons that Frank mentioned, he's seen 6 targets exactly each of the past or through the first 4 weeks of the season. And when we look at Christian Kirk, when we look at Rondale Moore, those are 2 guys that are going to ebb and flow with the offense, right? With the matchups. They're not going to be the most consistent options for your lineup. But A.J. Green, at this point, feels crazy to say, but A.J. Green is probably the most consistent wide receiver on that offense. DeAndre Hopkins has been getting it done, but A.J. Green is just consistent. And so I think now with what we've seen from him in the past 2 weeks and with the way that this offense is playing, A.J. Green absolutely is someone that you can pick up for cheap and be able to plug in, because no one in your league is going to want to pick up A.J. Green. But he's one of those guys that you can plug into your lineup as a flex option, and you can feel fine with him. Number 4 for me is Rashod Bateman. And this is buying into the talent level of what I saw on tape at Minnesota. Not so much in 2020, but in 2019. And then seeing the need that they have, the Baltimore Ravens offense has for him, and what he could be for this offense stepping in as the possession-style receiver. They need sure-handed receivers, and Rashod Bateman's going to bring that to this lineup. So I think he's going to earn Lamar Jackson's trust pretty soon. I expect him to return this upcoming week. He's someone that you can just slip onto the end of your roster if in casual leagues, people are not thinking about Rashod Bateman. He's only 18% rostered right now across all formats or across all platforms. So Rashod Bateman, someone that is worth looking at if you are in need of wide receiver.
All right. I'm glad you brought up Bateman because, I think coming off the last few games too, you've seen Lamar Jackson throw some really good balls. Not all of them get hauled in necessarily. This is exactly the kind of wide receiver he needs. This is exactly why they drafted him. It's been unfortunate he didn't start the season healthy, but I think you make a great point. You could probably sneak him in for a couple bucks and nobody will even see him. I want to talk about DeVante Parker for a second. Now, he's rostered in 40% of leagues overall, but Frank, with the news that we just got about Will Fuller missing another few weeks here, I think we all had some concern, let's put it, about DeVante Parker heading into this year, what it would look like, how it would be. But then we got the change of quarterback too. But if you look at the targets for DeVante Parker, they've been very consistent. Starting in week 1, 7-9, 7-9. So does he bring in any touchdowns so far? Just one. But at the same time, it seems like he's getting the targets. And when you're looking for wide receivers, you're looking for depth, you're looking for guys for the buy with this Will Fuller news, does DeVante Parker become somebody, and maybe even in a deeper league too, that you think has some value potentially, Frank?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think he can have value, and I think he's behind all the names that I mentioned, obviously, in that top 5. I would put Bateman ahead of him as well for the reasons you mentioned. I'm very excited about Rashod Bateman. I was pretty sad when the injury happened for him, but I think the fact that they've dealt with as many injuries to the running backs as the Ravens had, I actually think that they could support 3 pass catchers this year with Hollywood, with Mark Andrews, and Rashod Bateman. So I would put him ahead, but then I think DeVante Parker is probably that next name up, and you mentioned the injury to Will Fuller. The next 3 matchups for DeVante Parker: at Tampa, at Jacksonville, home against the Atlanta Falcons. That is about as good as it can get for a wide receiver right now. So, yes, given the injuries there, the fact that the targets have been pretty consistent, I know Jacoby Brissett has looked pretty awful here, but they've kind of been like playing from behind and like some sneaky shootouts here. So with those matchups, yeah, I can get behind DeVante Parker.
And because the depth of wide receiver, obviously a little bit better supply and demand, if you're putting in contingency bids for all of you listening out there too, maybe you don't have to spend as much to add a Green or a Renfrow, because you could throw maybe a couple bucks on Parker too. And if you get one of them, especially with the schedule that obviously Frank just did a great job of highlighting coming up, that's going to be a pretty good play for the next couple of weeks potentially there, with a decent floor at least, and we'll see what kind of ceiling. I want to talk to you guys next about the Detroit wide receivers. Most of them are out there. You got Khalif Raymond, you've got Quintez Cephas, you got Amon-Ra St. Brown, all of which had some moments in the last 2 weeks, especially in this previous game. I actually had to pick up Khalif Raymond in a league last week and had to play him because I had so many injuries. It's a deeper league, and guess what? It worked out. But Yates, do you want to make a case for any of these guys? I know it's difficult because you really don't know who the main target is, and it is Jared Goff, and we all know about his deficiencies. But when it comes to these 3 guys, is there one that you think actually maybe has a little bit more rest of season or even short-term value for fantasy owners out there?
I think it depends on what you need. If you need that immediate return, I think Khalif Raymond probably brings you the best opportunity. Like you said, you're able to pick him up in a deeper league and start him, and it worked out.
Yeah, got lucky.
Right, yeah, and that's part of what is fantasy football. But I think with the guy that I'm looking at here is Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that is for a lot of the reasons that I talked about in my work in pre-draft, and then talking about St. Brown coming into the year a lot, was that he has the talent, and he comped out for me almost identically to Robert Woods, and we saw Jared Goff lean on Robert Woods so much throughout their time in Los Angeles together that Amon-Ra St. Brown has the ability to carve out a significant target share in this offense as the slot receiver, and we saw that here this past week. And if Detroit is going to continue playing from behind as much as they are, that means increased opportunity. It's not going to be pretty, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, if he continues to develop, he continues to get the snap count, we continue to see that rise, he has the talent and ability to carve out a significant role, especially in full PPR formats. So Amon-Ra St. Brown is at wide receiver 9 in my rankings currently. He is the highest rated Detroit Lions wide receiver.
And don't worry, Yates, it wasn't all good luck for me. I also sat Cordero Patterson in favor of Will Fuller in flex this week, and that did not work out well for me. So
I don't want to talk about Cordero Patterson.
I don't either, but I have to say it out loud. I have to vent. Look, we all have these same problems that everybody else does too, okay? So it's good. We are human, everyone. Just remember, we take L's. We just try to get more W's as much as we can. Let's talk about the Detroit guys for you here, Frank. Do you see this in the same kind of light that Yates does?
Yeah, so I was actually a big fan of St. Brown coming into the year, mostly because he is their main slot receiver, or was projected to be, and to this point, he basically has. I'm looking at the week 4 routes run here, and 30 of his 32 routes came in the slot. And a big reason for that was, if you remember back in with the Rams, Jared Goff loved to use the slot receiver in Cooper Kupp. He also liked to use his tight ends, and so far this year we've seen a lot of TJ Hawkinson and throwing to the running backs. But I think as the season goes along and as St. Brown becomes more comfortable, he is a rookie wide receiver, that we are going to see more targets and more consistent playing time. And that really did look like the case in week 4. He played a season-high 72% of the snaps as well. They ran a ton of 3 wide receiver sets with Cephas, Khalif Raymond, and Amon-Ra St. Brown in this game. They don't have a good defense. I think that they're going to be playing from behind a lot. St. Brown is the name for me.
All right, I'm going to ask this question, but I'm only going to do it once, Frank. Josh Gordon, I know he was good in 2013. 2013 was a very long time ago. He hasn't played since 2019. I'm getting a lot of questions. I'm sure you are. I know Yates is too, about Josh Gordon. Is there any way you're adding Josh Gordon in free agency this week, Frank?
I think in deeper leagues, yes. Because once we get into the names like the Detroit Lions, once we get this far down the waiver wire, I mean, if you can take a chance on a potential number 3 pass catcher in the Chiefs offense, one of the best offenses in the NFL. I mean, they knew what they were getting into with Josh Gordon, and they still went out and they are shooting their shot here with him to see what he has left. And they obviously did that for a reason. So I understand we've kind of done this for a while now with Josh Gordon. It kind of feels like a revolving door. But in deeper leagues, yes, I would take a shot on Josh Gordon. He's behind basically all the other names that we've mentioned, except once we get into this group of Detroit Lions wide receivers, because I don't think that there is much upside there. But it's a deeper league player.
Yates, in 2013, the Harlem Shake was a thing. Lord was topping the charts. I'm just trying to give everybody a frame of reference here.
Crap.
The word selfie and the word twerk made it into the dictionary. So, and Froyo was all the craze. So I'm just trying to set the stage for 2013. So now that I've taken you to the Wayback Machine, let's take you back to 2021, if I may. And can you tell me, Yates, if you are going to add Josh Gordon in any league?
2013 was also Cordell Patterson's rookie season.
Lord. And you were in high school, probably.
I had just graduated high school. With Josh Gordon, it's interesting because I've got him at 11, and I think that he is in my wide receiver rankings. I think that he is worth taking the shot on, like Frank said, in deeper formats. However, it's so funny because the guy that I have at 4, Rashod Bateman, is currently rostered in 18% of leagues. Josh Gordon is rostered in 25% of leagues. We are still, as a people, chasing the 2013 season from Josh Gordon, and now when he signs with Kansas City, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna add Josh Gordon. I might add Josh Gordon, but again, it's got to be the deeper formats. It's got to be a spot where I'm not dropping a proven asset for Josh Gordon. I am just taking the shot and seeing what happens here. But yeah, I think he's worth considering.
I'm glad we talked about that. I think it's important to talk about for the people out there, and I get it. Look, we keep putting out the potential, but you make a great point. The fact that Bateman's not getting any publicity and Josh Gordon's getting all of it right now is just kind of ludicrous right now, and I just want to point that out. Also, I have a question for you guys. Another wide receiver, too, who's been dropped in a ton of leagues, or probably undrafted in some as well. It's T.Y. Hilton. Now, I know he's not coming back yet, but eventually the thought process is he's still working his way back. Yates, he is rostered in just 20% of leagues right now. Would you be doing any cheap, proactive ads of T.Y. Hilton this week, just trying to be ahead of the curve?
I'm really not, just because I've also got to burn that spot on him unless I have that IR spot available. Then I've got to but I've got to be able to have a bench spot to be able to use for T.Y. Hilton this upcoming week. He's a field stretching option, and at this point of his career, I just don't know how effective of a field stretching option he's going to be. Michael Pittman Jr. has taken over as the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, which is what I was projecting coming into the year. So I think that T.Y. Hilton is just a guy that you can add, and you might be able to play as a bye week flex option. I don't think that he's going to be much more than that. So Hilton is not a guy that I'm looking at.
How about you, Frank? Is there anybody else or T.Y. Hilton or somebody like that you think has some value potentially on the waiver wire before we close the door on wide receiver?
No, I think it's a sneaky name that you bring up, but I think it's just a little bit too sneaky here, Joe. I would put him behind Josh Gordon if I'm just taking a flyer on someone that I think can have value here. But Carson Wentz has not looked great to this point in the season, and I do agree. Michael Pittman, very clearly the number 1 pass catcher there in Indy.
The number 1 movie in 2013, Iron Man 3. Just putting that out there. Lots of things have happened since 2013, yet Josh Gordon still just beloved. I want to be beloved like Josh Gordon's beloved of fantasy players. That's I think the love we should all shoot for, boys. That's where we should all be looking. All right, let's be looking for quarterback next.
Really quick, Joe. Quick. I had someone that I wanted to just mention really quick before we move on. Absolutely. That is actually at 6 for me. That's Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney for me as a very, very talented and athletic wide receiver prospect coming out of Florida. I think that this is dependent upon Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton and their statuses moving forward, how long they're going to be out with these hamstring injuries. But if we get news on Tuesday, tomorrow, whatever, that they're going to miss this upcoming week, then Kadarius Toney is someone who should see volume And he has the talent to be able to create after the catch. Some of his runs after the catch this past week were just so much fun to watch. So, Kadarius Toney is actually at 6 for me. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned before we move on.
And that's a great point, too. And it's a huge matchup coming up for them on the road in Dallas, coming off their first win here. Big win there in overtime for the Giants. So good job mentioning Toney there. Let's shift gears to quarterback. We talked last week about Sam Darnold, that, look, even single quarterback leagues, you should be adding him. He's playing out of his mind, and hopefully you did, because last week if you added him and you had to start him, let's say, over Ryan Tannehill or some other guys like that, you did okay. Let's talk about who we want to add this week. I'm going to go out there on a limb and say it's going to be Drew Lock for Yates, right? Drew Lock. That's the guy you want to add, right?
Big Drew Lock fan.
A huge Drew Lock
That
fan.
is
Poster
incorrect.
above your bed of Drew Lock every night.
My wife loves it.
Your wife loves it. Huge fan of Drew Lock. All right, let's talk about Trey Lance. Let's just say, how much do we want to spend? Let's talk about it, because he's probably not available in Superflex. That's not even a question. So let's just talk about the single quarterback leagues. What is the spend on Trey Lance for you?
It depends, obviously, on what your quarterback situation is. So if you had Ryan Tannehill this entire time and you are just looking for an upgrade, I don't think that we can completely hold what happened this past week against Ryan Tannehill, but without A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. But he hasn't lived up to expectations. One of those players that we drafted that hasn't lived up to expectations, I am spending 15 to 20% of my fab on Trey Lance, because I do believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be out for the next couple of weeks. Again, we're recording this before we have that clarity, but Garoppolo, even himself last night, was like, I think it's going to be a couple week thing, could even be longer than that. And even if Trey Lance plays the way that he did in the second half, or like starts to show the building blocks and has a game plan that is built around him, because he was just stepping in as the backup quarterback last week and still performed as well as he did from a fantasy perspective, then I think that he's got this job moving forward. They're not going to go back to Jimmy Garoppolo if Lance plays well. So moving forward, Trey Lance now moves into the league-winning conversation, and that is the players that I am looking to spend big on. Those are the players that I'm holding onto my fab for in these instances, because they have the league-winning upside. And that was why we talked about Trey Lance throughout the entire offseason, was saying move forward this year with drafting 2 quarterbacks. Draft a Matthew Stafford late and add Trey Lance to the bottom of your bench. And the messages that I've gotten from people this entire week are like, thank you so much for telling us to do that, because I've held on to Trey Lance this entire time and it looks like it's going to pay off big. And I think that it is moving forward. So Lance is a guy that I am looking, he's my number 1 priority pickup, like across the board. He's my number 1 overall, because he does have the league winning upside that no one else in this grouping this week does.
Well, Yates, realistically, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Who would you then potentially start him over at QB1? Because we know the elites right now, the Prescotts and Lamar Jacksons and Kyler Murray and Josh Allen, not starting him over Mahomes. We're going to not start him over Rodgers, probably not Russell Wilson ever, obviously. But after that, so we're talking about Brady, we're talking about Stafford, we're talking about, probably Tannehill was on that fringe, Kirk Cousins was on that fringe. I can understand over Tannehill and over Cousins, but can you really be starting him over Brady? Can you really be starting him over Stafford with the way those two have played for the most part this year, barring the Sunday night emotional Tom Brady game in the rain? I don't want to really pin fantasy, disappointment to that necessarily, but where does Lance fit into that picture?
So it's interesting, because I haven't at this point done my projections for this next week, and I haven't done my rankings yet. So I don't know exactly where he's going to slide in. But I honestly think that he will probably slide in above Brady and Stafford this upcoming week, just because of his rushing upside and what he brings to the table. In that he played 2 quarters this past week and he got 20 fantasy points. He is going to finish as a top 15 option, and he played half of what the other quarterback options did. So I think that ranking him above guys like Tom Brady and Stafford, and we saw Stafford have a couple read options and scramble drills, but they don't have the rushing upside. They don't have the rushing potential that Trey Lance does. And when I say rushing potential, for people who have not paid attention to the Dynasty podcast or the offseason, whatever, Trey Lance could easily compete with Lamar Jackson for rushing yardage every single week. And on top of the skill set that he has as a passer with his cannon of an arm, plus the receiving weapons that he has at his disposal, he has top 5 upside every single time that he's playing. So he's going to make mistakes. He's a rookie quarterback. He's going to make mistakes, of course, but the upside is through the roof.
Yeah, and look, going into draft season, Kyle and I were president and vice president of this fan club. We thought he was clearly the number 2 quarterback on the board. Other teams did not agree with us for whatever reason, but It is very exciting. What's so exciting, I think, also, Frank, when you watch him play yesterday, is his ability to, get out there in space, avoid pass rush, and then make a big play. And that's the difference between going 3 and out, and that's the difference between going 40 yards down the field for a score or continuing a drive. And that's what's so exciting, not just for Lance and people who have rostered him, but also for the ancillary pieces in San Francisco who have been underwhelming outside of Deebo Samuel. Let's be honest. I mean, all of those pieces outside of Deebo, it's been a kind of depressing year for fantasy terms for the 49ers. I don't want to assume that Lance is your number one quarterback, but Frank, why is Lance your number one quarterback?
Lance is my number one quarterback, so good job on you there, Joe. And it's for a lot of the reasons that you guys have mentioned already. I was a little bit worried in the preseason that he wasn't really running as much as we kind of expected him to based on what he did back in college, but here you go. First game that he gets the opportunity to play extended time, he rushes 41 yards on 7 carries, and I think that's more of what we can expect as he steps in here for an injured Jimmy Garoppolo. And if we're being honest, if there's 5 offensive coaches that we trust in the NFL to get the most out of their weapons, Kyle Shanahan is one of them. So despite being a rookie quarterback, I think that Shanahan's going to put Trey Lance in a position to succeed here, and he has great weapons around him. We haven't really seen it from Ayuk yet this season, but we know that he's a talented player. Deebo Samuel is balling out. They have one of the best tight ends in the league in George Kittle, and they routinely get the most out of their running game, though we haven't really seen much from Trey Sermon to this point as well. So, yes, Trey Lance is my number one quarterback to add this week. I think 10 to 12% of your budget, you want to go as high as 15% in a one-quarterback league. I think Yates hit on a good quarterback in Tannehill, a name there where we expected him to do more to this point. It hasn't happened. Maybe Joe Burrow you drafted as your starting quarterback hasn't really been allowed to throw the ball as much as we expected. So those are 2 names where if you had those guys and you want to upgrade at quarterback, I think Trey Lance makes sense. And just one other quarterback I'll mention if you need a streamer, Daniel Jones. This is the Daniel Jones that I was expecting last year, and I was basically all in on in my 2 quarterback leagues, my super flex leagues. 67% completion rate, 8.2 yards per attempt. He just threw for 400 yards in week 4. He has at least 27 rushing yards in each game, and now he has a very important divisional matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, a defense that's playing well, but we just saw Sam Darnold have a pretty big fantasy game against them as well. So if you just need a streamer, I'll throw Daniel Jones out there also.
Now another good one. I'll throw somebody else out there too. How about Taylor Heinicke? Week 2 when he took over against the Giants, he finished as QB 12. Week 3 against Buffalo, I know it wasn't a pretty game necessarily, but he still finished as QB 10. Guess what? Finishes QB 5 this week right now with Monday Night Football still to go. Fantastic performance, and yeah, I get it. It's Atlanta, and he expected it, but I don't care. The dude is putting up fantasy points, and right now he has got back-to-back games with 3 touchdowns, and that's all I care about. So it's actually a pretty good week for streaming quarterback. Get them now because the bye weeks are coming. If these guys are floating around there, spend a little extra, and we're not spending a lot. We're spending, a couple bucks on some of these guys in these deeper leagues, but if they're out there, get ahead, because if nothing else, if you don't need them, somebody else might, and you never know when another injury is going to pop up there, and there's potential for then leverage in a trade if you have one of these assets that can help somebody and help them win a week. Let's move on to tight ends. Last week we did pretty good here, Yates. Dawson Knox was the guy, right? Dawson Knox performed, especially for everybody who had Rob Gronkowski issues. Like me, I know a lot of people did. If you had Dawson Knox, if you picked him up off the waiver wire, I know Andrew and I talked about it quite a bit on the start-sit show, too, of looking at Knox and, give it a shot, see what happens. The guy's performing, and guess what? Still just rostered in 33% of leagues. I would go as high as 10% here, because I'm telling you right now, he's got a floor. He's got some touchdown equity. That's all you could possibly ask for when it comes to tight end. Frank, is there a tight end that you have your eye on this week that you think is a good pickup that's rostered in less than 50% of leagues that really shouldn't be anymore?
Yeah, no, I think Dawson Knox 100% is that name there. He scored a touchdown in 3 straight games. He has 4 touchdowns during that span. And the matchup this week at the Kansas City Chiefs, a 56.5 point total. As of now, when we're recording this on Monday, it wouldn't surprise me if that even bumps up a little bit more. Right. And they are a team that just allowed Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz to combine for 116 yards and a touchdown. And look, the past couple of years, we as a fantasy community industry have watched Dawson Knox, and the guy could play. He definitely can play. It's just we didn't know if Buffalo can support that many pass options. They're just passing the ball so much over expectation right now that, yes, they can support a Stephon Diggs, who really hasn't even shown up to this point, but he's still been okay. Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, Dawson Knox, and especially in a matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, I think Dawson Knox is the name there. And the other one I'll throw out is Dalton Schultz, who has 3 touchdowns over his last 2 games, has played at least 68% of the snaps in 4 straight. A very important divisional matchup this week against the New York Giants.
I mean, the Giants have always struggled against the tight ends. We've known that too. So Schultz is definitely a good one if he's still available too. So hopefully these guys save tight end for you. Yates, anything to add here with this tight end bunch?
Dawson Knox is definitely at the top of the list. And, you talk about how much Buffalo is passing. Yes, that absolutely plays a huge role. But it's also because coming into the year, we were saying, well, we're going to see all 4 of these wide receivers involved. We're going to see them rotate through snaps, and they're still doing that. But Gabriel Davis has now faded to the background, and Dawson Knox took his spot. Dawson Knox took his target share, and he is absolutely succeeding with it. And that's been the thing. It's been Knox has the talent over the past couple of years, but he just can't get the opportunity. He can't get the volume. He's got it now, and he has a fantastic matchup coming up here. So if you have been rolling the dice with Robert Tonyan, Jonnu Smith, like these other tight ends that just are not clicking, it's not working, then go get Dawson Knox, because this is your best chance of having that reliable tight end.
Yeah, this is why you listen to the show, because last week you could have gotten him for $2, probably. Now it's going to cost you more like 12, because everyone's going to be looking around going, oh my God, he's catching all these touchdowns. I can't believe this guy's still around. Oh, it's a good matchup. That's why you got to be proactive, not reactive when it comes to the waiver wire, as best as you possibly can. As best as we possibly can, let's talk about our top 5 overall. Yates, why don't you kick things off here? Give me your top 5 waiver pickups, regardless of position, for week 5 in the NFL.
Of course, yeah. I mentioned it earlier. Trey Lance is at number 1, and I am willing to be very aggressive. And I wanted to ask both of your guys' opinion on this, actually, and I just remembered it right now, so that's why I'm bringing it up, versus when we talked about Trey Lance. But even if you do have one of the top-tier quarterbacks that you mentioned, Joe, you've got a Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, even Patrick Mahomes, whatever, and you haven't had to burn a lot of fab up to this point. Are you being aggressive, and are you actually looking to play defense and acquire Trey Lance in your league because of the upside that he presents? And maybe you're going up against someone this week that is going to be looking to scoop up Trey Lance and potentially play him moving forward. Would you actually deploy that as a strategy?
It's a great question. Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty sharp idea. Me personally, I think I would still save the fab for the running backs, because we know that there's still going to be so many more injuries throughout the course of the season, and it's just the most important position in fantasy football. So especially if you have one of those elite quarterbacks, I personally would not play defense, but I do think that it's a pretty sharp idea.
I'll tell you what, if you have one of those elite quarterbacks, there's a good chance you're hurting at running back, because typically to get one of those guys in the draft, either you hit on somebody late at running back and you're doing okay, but again, I don't know who that guy is necessarily. There haven't been a whole lot of those guys really to write home about. There's a better chance that you're still searching. So chances are you need that fab. I'm kind of where Frank lives, but I think it's a great point that if you've just had a great draft, or maybe you got a Dak Prescott late, or you got one of those top 5 quarterbacks at a good value because people were more disciplined in your league, or even a 10-team league, yeah, sure. I can understand that. I can understand playing a little defense here with Lance. And again, he becomes trade bait for somebody else, especially if he has an enormous game, right? If he has if he goes out there and him and Kyler Murray put on a laser light show, right? In terms of fantasy, this total goes over 60. People are going to be just out of their mind about Trey Lance, as they should be. And you might be able to sell him for even more than he's worth potentially. And you never know. Every other week brings another injury and the more opportunity to trade a player. So I'm with you, Yates. I do want to add, within reason, as much talent to my roster at all times. So if he's your 1, who's your rest of your top 5?
Yeah, of course. So I've got Damien Williams at 2, Darnell Mooney at 3. It feels great to have back-to-back Chicago Bears in my top 5. Samaje Perine at 4, and then I've got Jamison Crowder at 5. But again, any of those wide receivers that we talked about in that range. I've got AJ Green at 10 overall. I could easily see moving him up to 5 in that spot. They all kind of fall into the same tier.
All right. How about you, Frank? What's your top 5 overall waiver wire ads of the week 5?
Well, I'll remain consistent with what I just said regarding running backs versus Trey Lance. So I have Damien Williams number 1 on this list. Still waiting to find out what the injury prognosis looks like here for David Montgomery. And then I do have Trey Lance second on the list. I have Darnell Mooney, so 3 Bears in my top 3. Of course, it feels great. And then I have Dawson Knox, who I believe is the top tight end ad this week at 4, and Curtis Samuel, my number 2 wide receiver ad, 5th overall.
Dawson Knox, I love it. So good. All right, for me, my top 5, I got Darnell Mooney because I think long-term, this is probably the best investment of your fab. Like, I think he's going to help you throughout the year because I don't think Justin Fields gives this job back. How could they possibly go backwards to Andy Dalton after yesterday? That would be, and I know Yates is going to say it's Matt Nagy, and it's a good point, Yates. So I'm going to take the point that I know in your head you're making. But at the same time, I think you have to look ahead and see this is the future of the franchise. And what you saw was exciting, and what you saw is moving forward, and what you saw was an offense on a team that can compete. I think that division is more up for grabs than people realize right now, especially if you can go 2-2, which they've done here to start the year. Lance is definitely number 2. Obviously, if you're hurting for quarterback, you flip-flop those. Damien Williams is my 3. Once again, just waiting to see how long, how much, and I think that's what makes this interesting. So if you have early fab, like it runs on a Tuesday, and we still don't have clarity, I wonder what that impact is going to be on his cost. Crowder for me is 4, and Dawson Knox is 5, but if you're hurting for tight end, you can make the argument to move him to number 1. For goodness sake, he has been really good in a wasteland of tight ends. Oh my goodness. All right, let's talk streaming defenses here. Yates, you have a favorite streaming defense of the week?
I'm going to go with Minnesota. As we look at the matchup here up against the Detroit Lions, I think that while the Minnesota Vikings defense I'm not over the top about, but I think that up against Detroit, I think that they can do enough to get to Jared Goff. I think Goff is good for a turnover or 2 in a game. So I think that's the way that I'm playing this. Minnesota Vikings at the top of the list for me.
The Dallas Cowboys defense is rostered just 20% of leagues, and I understand last year they were terrible, but if you paid attention last year, they improved when Van Der Esch came back. Micah Parsons makes a huge impact. They are getting turnovers right now. That's what you want.
Trayvon Diggs is playing outside of his mind.
Is out of his gourd right now. He's playing so well. He's going to be highlighted this week on the IDP show. And this is why you listen to the IDP show, because we have a huge conversation about him, about Parsons, about the Cowboys. Bogman and I really did a deep dive into the Cowboys last week. And here's the funny thing. Back-to-back top 5 finishes in fantasy for the Cowboys in defense. Now, it's not always pretty. Sometimes they do give up some points. They've given up 31 that first week, give up 28 last week, but they got 5 sacks yesterday's game. They've had 2 sacks or more in the last 3 weeks, and they've had at least 2 picks in every single game this year. The Dallas Cowboys defense should be rostered. They get the Giants next week, right? And Daniel Jones historically has some turnovers in him. The New England Patriots, then they do have a bye, but after that, they got Denver, they've got Atlanta, they've got some good matchups here coming up, so I want the Cowboys. Frank, who do you want?
I am going to, for everything that we said about Trey Lance, I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals defense because, look, while we like Trey Lance, and Yates mentioned this, he's a rookie quarterback.
Right.
He's going to make mistakes. So things are going to happen, and maybe that's what causes this game to turn into a shootout. Maybe he throws a few interceptions, a pick 6, whatever it might be. But the Cardinals are currently the 6th highest scoring DST on the season. And, of course, they are getting a rookie quarterback in his first career start. So I will take the Arizona Cardinals.
All right, before we get into our little game of keep or drop, we do have to ask the question. Frank, is there a kicker you want to pick up and stream who's not rostered right now in most leagues you think can have a good week?
I'll go with Graham Gano. Again, like that divisional matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, a controlled environment, and he's just been a money kicker the past couple of years for them. So, yeah, I know it's not popular to talk about kickers, but I'll take Graham Gano.
That's why we do it as quickly as possible. We just want to make sure we get through it because we have to serve everybody. We serve the people. We are the People's Podcast. For me, it's Jason Myers for Seattle. I think the Rams, not the showing they were hoping for this weekend at home after I think maybe a little bit of a letdown after that huge game against Tom Brady. Short week here for them. It would not surprise me if that defense kind of took it out a little bit on Seattle. And what that might mean is just limiting them a little bit in terms of some of those drives that they might finish a little bit more field goals than 6s. So I'll go with Myers. Yates, is there a kicker for you have in mind?
For me, it's Rodrigo Blankenship, my glasses brother.
My dude.
I will go with, he's finished as a top 10 kicker each of the past 3 weeks, so I'm just going to continue to ride that one out. I'll go Blankenship.
That's my dude last week. I love Rodrigo Blankenship. Best name in college football a couple years ago. Best name in the NFL. Best look. You should be him for Halloween this year on the show.
It's crazy that you mentioned it because I legitimately looked at his picture and was like,
you could pull it off.
Maybe do that for Halloween.
Little Rodrigo Yates. You never know. This is why you tune in. All right. And again, if you don't subscribe to YouTube, you'll never see the costume. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel ASAP. All right. Let's play our little lightning round game to close things out. Whether or not these guys are rostered in CBS here, somewhere around 60% of leagues and less. Going to give you some names you want to keep or drop. Getting a lot of questions about this first guy, Yates. Laviska Shenault. Do you want to keep or drop? He is rostered in 60% of CBS leagues. Your thoughts?
Oh, at this point, you keep him. If DJ Chark was healthy and Shenault hadn't done anything this past week, then that might be a different conversation. But for me, yeah, you keep him.
I agree. Frank, how about you?
Yep, I'm keeping Shenault. 6 for 99 in his most recent game. Shenault on IR. I think it's an easy keep.
Yeah, Shark on IR. Yes, absolutely. Marquez Callaway, 50%. Rostered. Certainly had an injury there in this game. He's been frustrating. People had high hopes for him coming into the season. Marquez Callaway at 56%. Frank, keep or drop?
I'm all right dropping him here. I don't really want much exposure to the Saints offense right now. They're just not playing well, and I guess that's expected without no Drew Brees anymore. But yeah, we expected Callaway to be the guy. They're spreading the ball around. They're not really passing the ball all that much in general. So for those top 3 wide receivers we mentioned earlier, Jamison Crowder, Curtis Samuel, Darnell Mooney, I'd be all right dropping Callaway for any of those.
I agree. I'm with you. How about you, Yates? Callaway, drop?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that there's any value. When are you going to feel comfortable playing Marquez Callaway? So that's the way that I look at it. I'll pick up any of these other wide receivers over him.
Well, now that Josh Gordon is here, do we need Mecole Hardman anymore? Rostered in 50% of leagues, Yates?
I think that he's someone that you were just kind of holding as a bench stash anyway. He really was someone that was a volatile flex play week in and week out because we knew that Tyreek Hill was going to have one of these games eventually, and Hardman would kind of fade away. I don't think that there's any value now that we've got Gordon as kind of that bench stash here. So Hill has to go down with an injury for Hardman to have value, in my opinion.
All right, Frank, are you keeping or dropping Hardman at 50%?
Yeah, I think this one's a little bit closer, but I lean towards dropping. I don't know that they bring in Josh Gordon unless they loved Mecole Hardman as their wide receiver 3 or third pass catcher in this offense. So I lean closer to dropping him.
I would drop him for Mooney. I would drop him for Renfrow, Samuel, Crowder, Bateman, Parker, maybe even AJ Green at this point. That's where I'm at. So yeah, it's a drop for me. All right, this next one's going to be tough for Yates, so I'm going to give him a little time to prepare for it. I'll start with you, Frank. Tony Jones, 41% roster. Drop or keep?
Yeah, so I know he's dealing with an ankle injury that he suffered in week 4, but for the reasons I mentioned about Callaway, I just don't know how many pieces the Saints offense can support right now. So I think if you want to take a shot on one of those, Samaje Perine or a Damien Williams, I'd be okay dropping him.
Yates, Tony Jones.
If you've got the deeper benches and you can hold on to Jones, then I think that you can still do that. But he is merely just a insurance running back for Alvin Kamara. And even if Kamara goes down, I don't know what that insurance running back value is going to be. It's not like this is a top 5 scoring offense. So Tony Jones Jr., I'm only holding on to him if I've got the spot to do it. Otherwise, if I need someone, then yeah, absolutely cut Tony Jones Jr.
Le'Veon Bell was finally activated, but do we care? Yates,
No.
30%
No.
rostered. Okay,
No.
drop him. How about you, Frank? 30% on Le'Veon Bell.
In the words of the great Hawk Harrelson, Joe, he gone.
He gone. All right, very good. Last one here, a player with talent, but again, talent is one thing, productivity is another. Terrace Marshall Jr., Frank, 30%. Would you keep him still, or would you cut bait?
Yeah, I think we're at the point where we can cut Terrace Marshall just based on the names that are emerging here. Again, like all these wide receivers that we've mentioned today, even going as far as like AJ Green, DeVante Parker. I think that those guys could have some value, especially with their respective offenses and matchups coming up. So, yeah, it's a tough one, but I would make that swap.
How about you, Yates, on Marshall?
I'm not dropping him for many of the names on this list, but once we get like the top 10 in my list and up, then yeah, I'm fine dropping Terrace Marshall for any of those names.
All right, there you have it. Well, once again, I want to thank our good friend Frank Stampfl for hanging out with us today. Make sure you check him over at Fantasy Football Today and all the great work he does at CBS Fantasy. He does baseball, he does football, maybe curling, some other sports here. I know the Winter Olympics are around the corner. I'm a big curling fan, so we'll see how that goes. And certainly follow him on the Twitter machine at Roto_Frank. Frank, what you got coming up this week? What's exciting in the world of CBS?
Yeah, so baseball is over. The regular season is over. Obviously, the playoffs are happening, but we're still doing 2 off-season baseball podcasts per week here. We're going to recap a bunch of what just happened throughout the course of the regular season. We'll go position by position, talk about a few of the polarizing players for next year in October, because why not? There's a lot of look, baseball never ends. And then football, hosting their Fantasy Football Today DFS podcast. We do that twice per week. So on Tuesday, we're going to recap everything that happened this past week. On Thursday, we do a deeper dive going through each game. So you could follow both of those podcasts over at CBS Sports. Appreciate you having me on, Joe.
Oh, always a pleasure to talk to my old friend. I remember when you were just starting out in the business, kid. Before anybody knew who you were. Now look at you. You're all famous. And then I expect nothing less. You always were a hardworking guy, and I'm so happy you've gotten the opportunities you've gotten, and certainly not surprised that you've made the most of them. You do great work. I watch you all the time. I think you're doing great work. I don't care what Yates says. Yates, also, by the way, you got Trey Lance on Sunday. You got Justin Fields on Sunday. It's got to be a pretty good feeling for you, right? That was a kind of a nice day of football for you, anxiously awaiting a change of quarterback for the Bears and anxiously awaiting to see Trey Lance finally on the football field without Jimmy Garoppolo anywhere in sight. So that's got to be making for a very exciting upcoming week 5 for you.
It is. And I mean, even going back to last week, Robert Woods found the end zone. Johnny Smith found the end zone. So yeah, it was a good week for me.
Things are coming up. Yates right here in the program. All right. I want to remind everybody before we go, check out our YouTube page. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Pros over on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/fantasypros and click that notifications bell. And that way you can ask us questions on the live streams on Sundays or any live stream you want when you are a subscriber. Also, phenomenal content that we're pumping out every single day. Videos, podcasts, live streams, and a whole lot more. It's going to be a beautiful thing. And also, don't forget to check out My Playbook cheat sheets. Head over for free. fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Hook up your team, and then you can use those cheat sheets for free to help you get instant waiver wire and lineup advice by combining your favorite experts' weekly, rest of season, or dynasty rankings into one customizable cheat sheet to help you out. And while you're there, you could also sign up, obviously, for all of the great functions we have at My Playbook, which include the waiver assistant, the trade analyzer, the start-sit assistant, and, of course, autopilot as well. So many tools, so much talent. What's not to like? I want to thank all of our listeners for the last couple weeks. I don't know where we would be without you. A special shout-out to all of you during this tough time for us, but you being with us this season means the world to us, and I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us at Fantasy Pros. So that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Kyle Yates and Frank Stampfl, I'm Joey P. We will see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.